Some people will say like, oh, well, we want to be the next Silicon Valley, or we want to be the next Boston, or whatever that is. Be the next Buffalo, because there's a lot of benefit to growing a business here. I grew up in Wisconsin, a really small town up by Lake Superior that nobody's ever heard of. I moved to Seoul, South Korea, lived there for 12 years, did a bunch of startup stuff. When I first went to Seoul, I was actually an English teacher. A lot of people do that. After a couple of years, a friend of mine came to me with an opportunity to join a startup. And from there, I moved to another startup and then another one. And then when my wife and I were thinking about moving back to the US, we didn't really want to move to New York City. We were ready for something a little bit more relaxed than that. I had been to Buffalo several times, actually. So my wife grew up in Williamsville. But when I brought up the idea of Buffalo, my wife wasn't really sold on it. My entire career had been in startups, something that she didn't think Buffalo had very many of. And so it kind of became my job to figure out what else was going on here. I found a couple of companies that convinced me that there was more going on here than my wife probably knew about. When you look at the way that government has invested in certain programs, you've set up some business tracking programs like 43 North, but then you've got the ability to homegrown startups. You get all the pieces in place you need to see the kind of growth that Buffalo has seen over the last 10 years. You are seeing more people take the risk of starting businesses now than I think you have in the last decade. And some people say like, oh, well, we want to be the next Silicon Valley, or we want to be the next Boston. Be the next Buffalo. If that means a lot of exits in the $10 to $20 million range or the $40 million range, that's not a bad thing for building a city. Continue to produce companies that are going to produce jobs, produce wealth, all that stuff, and maybe the occasional home run, right? Like that's really what we're aiming for. You've got a lot of young companies doing some great work that have real growth potential. It actually shows that Buffalo has a healthy, growing startup ecosystem here. 10 years ago, I think it would have been a lot harder to sell my family on moving here. The fact that my in-laws, who've never been in a startup or thought about being in a startup, send me articles on startup stuff that's happening in Buffalo, that there's this kind of like new positivity around starting new companies and around being an entrepreneur. I hope that positivity continues to grow because there's a lot of benefit to growing a business here.